Good evening, everyone. How are y'all doing tonight? Now, I know it's Monday night, and I'm not the type of person to make Among Us jokes this early in the week, but Planet Earth, listen to me. We have an imposter among us in this galaxy because I booked a ticket on the intergalactic taxi service to Planet Earth. But when I stepped off the runway, it was obvious that I was on the wrong planet. And when I asked the locals what planet I was on, they told me I was on Planet Earth. Welcome to Oblivion's Library. I'm Haley Straub, your local intergalactic traveler, exploring the galaxy, collecting and sharing stories. Back to where I am. I am not on planet Earth right now, at least not the planet Earth that we all know and love, because it turns out the word Earth has different meanings the further you go across the galaxy. Earth is just the generic term for the planet you were born on, the planet you would call home. If you ask someone where Taylor University is, they'll say it's on planet Earth. But if you ask what planet the story I'm about to tell you is, they'll say it's on Earth. But it's not the same planet Earth. They just have people that call it their home, and they both happen to have the same word for home, which is Earth. So, yep, today's story is a sci-fi story taking place on this alternate Earth. While I'm here, I figured I might as well make the best of it, so I've been doing all the touristy things while also getting some writing done. This Earth has better technology than my home Earth, so I've written about something intriguing that has happened here recently. This story is owned and copyrighted by Haley Straub. This story is not affiliated with Taylor University and may not necessarily reflect the views of the institution. All stories on this podcast are PG and LTC friendly, except this story requires a disclaimer. I will always give a heads up if there's a living character death, so I'm not going to give any spoilers, but this story does have one character dying of fall damage. And on that cheerful note, not at all, let's jump in. Today's story is called OZZY and Envy. And it starts on the Noctis, a space colony high in Earth's orbit. While the smartest people on Earth worked at the Mayo Clinic or Silicon Valley, the scientists here were so smart they descended from Earth entirely. The Noctis was used specifically for the building and testing of artificial intelligence, and many a rogue robot had rampaged these metal halls. And on the space station, a scientist walked briskly through the halls, her high heels echoing on the metal floor. Her name was Dr. Luxora, and she felt very uncomfortable walking the chilly halls at this hour of the night. A new scientist had been hired just last week. In Luxora's eyes, it had been a waste of money. Dr. Adam Paradark, barely out of grad school, had arrived on the space station earlier this week with his wife. Like everyone else on this flying chunk of hardware, he had been commissioned to build a lifelike, fully functioning robot. But rumors were spreading among the scientists that Dr. Paradark had arrived with his robot already done. And it was this curiosity that drew Luxora to the new hire's living quarters. The first thing she noticed was a break in the aesthetic. Among the smooth white and black and silver metal of the Noctis, a wooden sign was hung on a piece of fraying paracord. It had the letter P for Paradark, she assumed, and was hung on a door. Luxora had found the right place. Her knock was answered by the young scientist, and Luxora looked him over. He was well built, with dirty blonde hair and naive-looking eyes. Looking at him made Luxora feel old. "Oh, hi," he smiled. "Sorry, this is my first time getting a visitor on a spaceship. We didn't know if a housewarming party was appropriate. I'm Adam Paradark." Luxora stiffly shook his hand. His handshake was strong, at least. "I'm Dr. Luxora. I specialize in data management. I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to the Noctis," she decided. "Oh, of course, come in. Hey, Ada, we've got company." Adam left Dr. Luxora standing in the entrance hall, and she took in their living space. The Paradarks had no respect for the space aesthetic, or else they were too poor for it. Cardboard boxes were littered everywhere, and picture frames and homey decorations sat on the floor, leaning against the walls they would eventually hang on. The living room wasn't unpacked yet, but the TV was playing a movie that sounded like it was from the 1950s. Meanwhile, dirty dishes sat soaking in the kitchen sink. But Luxora wandered into the kitchen, staring at the fridge. Scribbled drawings were tacked onto it with magnets. Who had drawn them? Adam reappeared from down the hallway. Sorry about the mess. We're still getting settled in. We're not slobs, I promise. Ada made meatloaf for dinner. You want some? I can warm some leftovers up." Luxora continued staring at the fridge. "Oh, I'm good. I just wanted to stop by and ask about your vision for working on this ship. The briefing they gave us about you left a lot of questions unanswered. Can I ask you about that? And do you actually have your robot already done? Well, sure. Adam took a sip of coffee and leaned back against the counter. Here's what my wife and I think. The goal is to make an AI that can be put in a position of power. It can be less than a year from the first line of code to the finalized product. But people get held back from positions of authority until they're at least 18 years old. My theory for the reason AIs fail so much is because they're working before they've had time to live. It's the same as giving a position of power to a toddler. Luxora stared at him through her thick spectacles. It's not the same, Adam, because a computer can mature much faster than a person. We can tell it what to do. And when, Dr. Luxora, was the last time you did something that someone told you to do? Adam sipped his coffee again, eyeing her laughingly. Follow me. I'll introduce you to my kids. Luxora rolled her eyes as she followed him down the hallway. At least tell me you have a decent name for your project. At this, Adam hesitated. I pride myself in knowing what others think about me, and I already know all the rumors about my family. I've called my robot Paradox Envy. He met Luxora's eyes, for no particular reason. Luxora tightened her jaw as Adam opened the door to the playroom. The windowless room was cluttered with toys. A woman with her hair in a messy bun noticed Luxora and scooped up a toddler in a teal dress. Dr. Luxora? Hi, I'm Ada, Adam's wife. This is our daughter, Krista. She's about 9 months old. But Luxora was preoccupied by the other child in the room, the full-sized silver and purple humanoid robot sitting limply against the wall. Luxora was stunned by how beautiful it was, sleek and slim, made of shining silver metal with purple accents, outlined in white rubber on his fingers, shoulders, and face. She leaned toward him. Is he on? In response, the robot's bright purple eyes snapped to meet hers, and the metal body stirred. Luxora jumped back. It was more lifelike than she had imagined, and the rubber over the metal skeleton made it look almost alive. Adam took the robot's arm and pulled it to a standing position, but the robot lost its balance and scrambled for a footing, holding on to his father. It's his feet, Adam explained. He has individual fingers, but not toes. My wife wanted his feet designed like high heels, so he looks more regal when he walks, but he doesn't have balance receptors yet, so we're working on staying upright. Envy, this is Dr. Luxora. Can you say hello? The robot's purple eyes met Luxora's again, but he didn't speak or change expression. Adam lowered him back to the floor, where the robot grabbed for a crayon. He's a child, Luxora realized. You've built a robotic child. Well, what do you expect? He's only a month old. Luxora scoffed. Do you actually expect him to improve, though? You haven't given him any directive. He'll be a stumbling, immobile toddler forever. I don't care, Ada said sharply, because Envy is my son and I love him. Luxora stepped over the toys on the floor to watch the robot more closely. With stiff, unfamiliar hands, he picked up a crayon and lightly dragged it over a scrap of paper on the floor. Then he looked up and met Luxora's eyes. Oh, yes, that's very good. She played along. The robot looked back to his drawing. He had started making random lines on the page with rigid motions, snapping the crayon in his hand multiple times. Luxora's jaw dropped as she realized what he was doing. He was writing his name. It wasn't the normal way of writing English, but Envy, in all caps, was now written on the page. Luxora wondered about the possibilities, the implications of what she just witnessed. What on earth had the Paradox created? Adam, I want to apologize, Luxora decided, trying to calm the storm of questions inside her. I was making fun of you when I called your project Paradox Envy. I really wasn't expecting you to embrace it so hard. Adam shrugged lightheartedly. Hey, if a few nasty rumors could stop me, I never would have gotten married. Besides, Envy's as good a name as any for a robot. Come here, Envy. Adam bent down by the robot and put his arms around the robot's back and knees. He shifted his weight, then picked the robot up and carried it like a person toward the door. Ada followed with baby Krista. What are you doing? Luxora asked. We're still in the process of starting our lives here, Adam explained behind him as he carried the robot through the living room. Wouldn't you find it weird if you were transported to a new place but never shown where you were? He nudged the wall, and the shutters automatically retracted to reveal the living room window. The rotation of the Noctis was perfect right now, and the view from the window showed a sliver of planet Earth floating in the black and starry void of space. Adam sat in the nearest chair and settled the limp robot on his lap, leaning awkwardly against him. Look at that. He turned the robot's head so it looked out at the scene. That's the Earth, Envy. We're on the Noctis, and this is our new home. Ada joined them at the window. It sure is beautiful. The robot didn't move and didn't react, but its eye twitched. Envy was coloring a picture. He didn't know why, he just wanted to, and this was one of the things he could do. After all, his sister Krista was coloring too. Envy set down his crayons and stared at the paper. He was trying to draw Krista, but his hands weren't accurate enough to make anything legible. Envy moved the crayon too hard, and it snapped in his hands. He grabbed a new one and continued, trying to be gentler. Mother? He showed her the picture. What do you think? He watched Mother's reaction, and was relieved when she smiled. It's beautiful, Envy. Envy considered her words. What does beautiful mean? You know what beautiful means. It means very pretty and well done, Mother replied. That was true, but Envy still didn't understand. What about his picture made it beautiful? No matter how many times Mother and Father tried to explain it, he didn't understand what the word beautiful meant, and Krista had gotten tired of Envy asking her. She didn't know any more than he did. After all, both of them were only 5 years old. I'm done coloring. Krista jumped up and ran over to the dress-up box, her golden curls bouncing. Envy shakily stood up and followed. He'd learned to walk on his own by now, but sometimes still lost his balance. From the wooden box, Krista pulled out some fake wings and put them on. I'm a garden fairy, she cried, spinning around the room with her magic wand. Envy watched Krista put on a pink dress over her clothes, and then looked down at himself. Krista, how come you wear clothes and I don't? Krista was distracted digging through the costumes, so Mother answered him. You're a robot, Envy. But do you want to play dress-up? You can be a flower fairy, too. From the box, Krista pulled out one of Father's old lab coats. Mother showed Envy how to put it on, and Envy stared at himself in the mirror. The fabric felt weird. It was the first time he'd really worn anything. You need a crown, Krista decided, but all her plastic crowns were too small for Envy's head. So Krista grabbed a pink wig from the dress-up box and put it on Envy's head first, then stuck a crown in the hair. Envy played with the pink wig in the mirror. Krista, does hair count as clothes? No, she laughed as she put on her own crown. There, now we're fairies. And she ran around the room some more. But Envy kept staring at himself in the mirror. He couldn't deny how much he looked like Mother now. Mother, he asked, can I keep playing dress-up all the time? Can I wear hair and clothes like you? Mother was surprised, but agreed. She found Envy some clothes that fit him, and taught him how to put them on. And best of all, for Envy's birthday that year, she gave Envy a wig. It was brown hair, a few inches long. Envy loved the wig and superglued it to his head so he could wear it all the time. And every time he saw himself in a mirror or window, he knew he was beautiful. Mother said the wig made him beautiful, but Envy still didn't know why. One night, Envy sat with Mother and Krista in their bedroom, reading stories before bed. Envy and Krista shared a bedroom with twin beds against opposite walls. Even though Dr. Luxora had been quick to point out that Envy didn't need sheets and a pillow to sleep, Mother and Father had insisted that Envy recharge like the rest of them. Mother yawned. It's almost bedtime, she noted. We can maybe do one more. Envy, why don't you go get your poetry book? You love that one. Envy walked over to the bookshelf by the window. His favorite book was a large book of poetry, which was kept on the top shelf. He reached up for the book and pulled it out, but couldn't catch it in time, and the book fell open on the floor. Envy sighed. I always make mistakes with this. Mistakes are how we learn, Mother replied. Keep trying. Think about what went wrong and don't do it again next time. That's how you learn things. And if you want to learn a lot, you'll have to make as many mistakes as you can. Envy thought it over as he picked up the book. So if I make lots of mistakes, and learn lots of lessons. I'll eventually learn every lesson in the world. Then I will be perfect. Mother shook her head. It's a sinful world, Envy. That's not how it works. But when will I be done learning? You never stop learning. Mother combed her fingers through Envy's wig. Even I'm still learning. Learning lessons is how you live. Now read me your favorite poem again. The poetry book was creased open to Envy's favorite poem, Ozymandias. He had already committed it to memory, but loved reading it anyway. On the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown, wrinkled lip, and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. When Envy and Krista were 8 years old, Mother took them on a walk around the Noctis. It was a working place, and there weren't many places for little kids to play. Envy and Krista were very curious, though, and loved to explore. Mother took them to the loading docks, the largest room on the space station. It had a huge door that opened into empty space, and the entire floor was covered in wooden crates, machinery, and raw materials. As Mother talked to the workers about something, Envy and Krista busied themselves by playing on some crates. Let's make a castle, Krista decided. What's in these crates anyway? I don't know. Stack that one on top there. Carefully, Envy stacked the heavy boxes. Krista climbed on top and stomped her foot. I am the queen of planet Earth. Give the password to enter my castle. Envy loved playing pretend. He took off his jacket and tied it around him like a cape. Then he climbed up onto another crate and gently stood up. If you are queen of Earth, then I am king of the Noctis. The password to enter your castle is Ozymandias. Krista slouched. Aw, man, you always guess it. In reality, Krista and Envy only had one password that they used for every game. Krista hauled up a sheet of clear material and laid it between her and Envy's crates, making a bridge. You guessed the password correctly. You may cross the drawbridge and enter my castle. Envy stepped onto the bridge, trying to balance properly. But after 2 steps, he heard a low creaking sound. The clear bridge faltered, and looking down, Envy saw cracks start to spread from his feet. The little bridge completely shattered, and Envy landed hard on the crates beneath him. He had only fallen a few feet, but it messed with his orientation, and suddenly everyone was looking at the robot in hair and clothes sitting among a shower of glass shards. Envy Paradark! Mother ran over. What are you doing? Envy felt guilty. I'm sorry, we were just playing pretend. You broke that sheet of glass. That belonged to the workers. We'll have to pay for that, Mother yelled. Glass is super fragile, Krista, especially when you walk on it. You want to make a bridge? You get a wooden board or a metal beam. You don't walk on glass. Mother continued to be mad at them for the rest of the day. Envy learned from the situation and decided he would never walk on glass again. One day, when Envy and Krista were 12 years old, Father took them to his lab. It was a special treat. They weren't allowed in there without Father's permission. Envy loved watching the scientists at work, especially Father's work friend, Dr. Luxora. Krista, you're getting so big, Dr. Luxora smiled as she put on her glasses. And Envy, you look good as ever. How have you been? Envy made sure to make proper eye contact. I've been learning a lot of lessons, Dr. Luxora, like the correct grip strength to not break a crayon or a pencil, and how to get a book down from the top shelf, and to not walk on glass, and more. Dr. Luxora smiled. Beautiful. And guess what? I've been talking with your father about a project I want to try. Envy, Krista, how would you two like it if we made you a brother? Krista blinked. A robotic one or a real one? Robotic, Dr. Luxora laughed. We want to make another robot like Envy, to copy him, and see if the lessons he's learned will hold up. Another me. Envy thought it over. He was a unique robot, he knew that. But if he went through with this, he would not be unique anymore. He would no longer be special, but at least he would no longer be alone. Perhaps another robot would know how to define beautiful. Envy agreed to Dr. Luxora's plan. A few months later, Envy and Krista's new brother was ready. Envy was nervous to meet another robot, wondering what he would be like. When Envy entered the living room that night, the robot was sitting in Father's favorite chair. staring out the window at the earth below. He was identical to Envy. Same metal, same rubber, same face. The only difference was that unlike Envy, who had purple parts, this robot had orange parts in the same places. Envy and the robot locked eyes. The robot blinked. "You look familiar." His voice was different, at least. "I'm your brother, so I know all the things you know and every lesson you've learned." Envy nodded, remembering how Dr. Luxora had described her project to him. "Hello, I am Envy. What's your name?" The robot hesitated, then looked down. Envy froze, an unfamiliar feeling shooting through him. The robot was holding Envy's favorite book of poems. "This is my favorite poem, Ozymandias." The robot moved his hand over the page. "My name is Ozymandias, like the person in this poem. For short, you may call me Ozzy." To the delight of their parents, Ozzy, Envy, and Krista became good siblings, and Ozzy was given a bed in the kids' bedroom. Envy was excited that he finally had someone like him to talk to. Ozzy had already learned every lesson that Envy had, and Mother and Father were proud of him. But even when the three of them put their heads together, neither Ozzy nor Envy nor Krista could figure out a good description of what the word beautiful meant. Since they were identical twins, Ozzy and Envy had the same thought processes. Ozzy opted not to wear a wig, and neither of them were allowed to wear Krista's dresses. But there was something different about Ozzy, something that only Envy saw. Whenever Ozzy wrote gently with a pencil or swiftly took a book down from the top shelf, Envy felt something negative inside him. He couldn't figure out what it was, and couldn't formulate it into words enough to tell Mother, Father, or Krista, and he certainly wasn't going to tell Ozzy. When Ozzy and Krista were 14 years old, and Ozzy acted 14 while being technically 2, Father told them how the scientists on the Noctis gave annual speeches that were broadcast to Earth. Ozzy and Envy had been asked to give speeches. They would be the first robots to ever give them. The siblings talked it over later that day. Envy sat on his bed, sewing up a hole in one of his shirts. "Mother and Father jumped at the chance for us to give this speech. I think we might be doing it whether we want to or not." Ozzy nodded. "They even bought me a black suit." "Hey, this is another learning chance." Krista looked up from her bracelet kit. "Learning how to write and say a public speech." "But what do we talk about?" Ozzy cried. "Father said it should be about our lives on the Noctis, about the lessons we've learned. Do I really need to tell Earth about the proper way to hold a pencil?" Krista pulled back her hair into a ponytail. "Hey, that pencil lesson was hard-earned. You know how many pencils Envy broke before he figured out how to hold them correctly? I was doing math homework with super short pencils for months." Ozzy shrugged. "It's still not that important, but I have a topic idea." The day of the speech arrived, and Envy awoke fully recharged. Before getting dressed, he brushed out his wig. "Ozzy, when you get your suit from the laundry room, can you get mine too?" But Ozzy hesitated. "Envy, I don't think I'll wear my suit today. I don't think I'll wear anything. Clothes are a human thing. We're robots. We don't have to wear them, you know." Envy was startled. "But we've learned how to wear clothes. I literally make all the clothes we wear. Do you not like them?" "I do. I just don't want to wear them." Ozzy shrugged. As he put on his suit, Envy ran through the conversation over in his head. Ozzy was right, even if it was an unusual decision. Envy had gotten used to wearing clothes and enjoyed it, but Ozzy was his own person, or his own robot, and he had to learn things for himself. The speeches took place on the loading docks, the only place with enough room for all the guests, reporters, and financiers to gather. About 100 feet off the floor was a see-through balcony made of glass. Normally, 4 men and overseers stood on it to get a full view of the room while they worked. The speeches were always given on this balcony, from a podium with a microphone to the crowds seated on the ground floor far below. The balcony's railings had been removed, something about it looking nicer on camera. That left nothing between the speaker and a 100-foot drop. Mother had instructed her kids strictly not to get too close to the edge. Envy looked at the platform and remembered the last time he walked on glass, how it had creaked and then shattered beneath his feet. Even though he knew this glass was hardened specifically for walking, Envy didn't like it. The Paradarks waited in the hallways behind the balcony. listening through the walls to the other speech givers, who talked about finances, AI capabilities, and updates on various projects. Soon, it was Envy's turn. Krista smiled at him in the dark and gripped his hand warmly. "Smile," she whispered. "You look beautiful." Envy tried to copy her smile. "You know I don't know what beautiful means." "What about me?" OZZY demanded. "Am I beautiful?" Envy nodded. "Krista says I'm beautiful. You look exactly like me, so that must mean you are beautiful too." It made sense, but something about it wasn't right. Whatever the word beautiful meant, Envy wondered if it really applied. With a deep breath, Envy walked onto the glass platform, his eyes dilating in the bright light. The packed crowds below him applauded as he stepped up to the podium. "Hello, I am Envy Paradark." He froze as his voice echoed around the room. "My name was an insult. My father's colleagues called me Paradark's Envy because they thought my father envied robotics that functioned better than his. But the name is mine now, and recently it's taking on a new meaning for me. A few years ago, I got a brother named OZZY, but there's one thing that isn't fair about him. All the lessons I had to mess up and learn from were automatically given to OZZY. He got to skip out on the hard part and already know the benefits, and I envy him for that." Envy hesitated. That wasn't in his notes, but somehow he'd come to that conclusion. He decided to just roll with it and continued speaking about OZZY and Krista and the lessons he'd learned. "While I love my brother OZZY, I don't think copying me will be the answer my father's scientist friends are looking for. You can't just teach a lesson without the consequence that drilled that lesson in the first place. Everyone makes mistakes, me more than most, but the more mistakes I make, the more I will learn, the more perfect I will become. I hope to learn as much as I can. Maybe then I will learn what the word beautiful means." He continued for a bit longer and ended his speech confidently. The crowds below him erupted into applause. Envy was winded when he returned to the dark hallways. He wanted feedback, but OZZY didn't look at him. OZZY just strode out onto the platform and began his own speech. Krista hyped Envy up, cheering him on and hugging him, telling him how proud mother and father had to be. After soaking it all in, Envy sat with Krista to hear what OZZY had to say. But the more Envy listened, the more he didn't like what he heard. OZZY had said he was talking about lessons and mistakes, but he was taking another angle. OZZY was saying things that mother and father hadn't approved. "I would have to disagree with my brother Envy," OZZY announced. "Learning things requires mistakes, but I don't like mistakes. I would just as much rather not make mistakes and not learn anymore. I don't want to learn anymore, because that means hard thinking, changing how I do things, and worst of all, admitting I was wrong." Envy was confused. Where was this coming from? OZZY had never expressed sentiments like this before. The Paradark family was already on thin ice with Earth. This was not going to help. OZZY held up a pencil and waved it around so the room could see it. "One of the lessons Envy has so graciously bestowed upon me is how to properly hold a pencil." He stared at it, mesmerized. Then OZZY snapped the pencil in half with his bare hand. "Forcing me to learn things is changing who I am. Maybe I don't want to hold a pencil that way. I want life to stop teaching me lessons and for life to stop telling me what to do." Envy and Krista just stared at each other, bewildered. It took 6 years of pure living to figure out the lesson thing, Envy realized. OZZY is 2 years old. He hasn't learned that yet. Whose idea was it to give him a microphone? In a moment of desperation, Envy ran out onto the platform, into the lights again, and pulled OZZY away from the podium. "What are you doing, OZZY? You want to stop learning lessons? That's nonsense. Do you know how hard I work to learn the lessons we use daily? You had your turn to talk. Now it's my turn." OZZY pushed Envy away, but Envy held him firmly. So OZZY shoved Envy with his full weight, causing Envy to lose his balance, and his foot slipped. There was no more floor underneath him, and Envy realized he was falling with no way to stop it. But there was only one thing to fall off here. OZZY had pushed him, and Envy only realized it a second before he hit the floor. When Envy finally woke up, he was in Father's lab. He learned from Dr. Luxora that it had been a few months since the accident, and after working tirelessly, Father's team had put him back together piece by piece. Still, Envy was having a hard time processing what had happened. His clothes and wig weren't at the lab, and it felt strange walking through the Noctis without them. He had fallen, and he had shattered. That much was obvious. But what was there to learn from this? Every time Envy tried to think about what had happened and learn something from it, fear kept the memory vague in his mind. When he finally got back home, Mother wouldn't stop hugging him and crying. The Paradox were finally back together, and Envy was repaired, but he noticed a sense of darkness in his happy family. Father was unusually serious, Mother was emotional, and Krista was always nervous. But when OZZY timidly joined them in the living room, Envy remembered everything, and only then did Envy realize how angry he was. "OZZY! You pushed me! You pushed me off the glass balcony! Surely you realized I would have shattered from that height, yet you did it anyway!" OZZY was sympathetic. "I'm sorry, Envy. Really, I am. I only meant to push you away from me, not off the edge. I won't do it again." Something triggered in Envy's mind. "Yes, you will," he whispered. "Because as you were so eager to point out in your speech, consequence means nothing to you. You will do it again because you don't learn your lessons. You're sorry? What is that supposed to mean? What I should do is shove you off a balcony so you know how it feels. Then you really won't do it again." "Envy," Father snapped. "Stop it. No one is pushing anyone off any more balconies. We do not push each other around, and we do learn our lessons in this house." But Envy continued talking to Father long into the night. "Something is wrong with OZZY, Father. I make mistakes, and I learn lessons, and I never make those mistakes again. OZZY doesn't do that. He just keeps making the same mistake over and over, not realizing there's something to be learned, not realizing there's a better way to do it." Father sighed. "Your sensors are overloaded from being awake again, Envy. Nothing's wrong with OZZY. He's just practicing his free will. Believe me, he's got a lot of talking to over the months you've been asleep. OZZY's still figuring out the world. He'll learn eventually, just like you did. And, Envy, I know you want to shove OZZY off a balcony to get back at him. He won't learn otherwise. He needs the consequence to drill in the lesson of don't push people off balconies." "I know," Father calmed him down, "but maybe that's not for you to teach him." Envy sighed. He was starting to think existentially, and that meant it was time for bed. But he had one more question. "Father, what does beautiful mean?" "Well, beautiful means something harmonious, something well put together, like a family, or an array of color, or music, or like you over these past few months." He smiled warmly. "You are beautiful, Envy. I hope you know that." Envy was sitting in the loading dock, safely on the floor this time, in front of the giant doors that were open to the void of space. Most people couldn't get very close to the door, or they'd fall victim to the void. But Envy couldn't breathe or freeze, so he sat near the edge fearlessly. It was different than the platform behind him. The platform you could fall off and hit something, but it was different in the void of space. Envy stared down at the earth hanging in the stars. The blue and green and white on it were the oceans and the land and the clouds, or so Krista's books had said. She'd been reading a lot of books about Earth recently, and kept begging Mother and Father to take them there. She'd said she'd never actually seen land or clouds, and it wasn't fair that she was cooped up on the Noctis. Her resulting breakdown when they repeatedly told her no was the reason Envy was here alone tonight. Behind Envy, a small spaceship was being loaded to go down to the planet's surface. Envy recognized Father's work friend, Dr. Luxora, with her gray hair and thick glasses, and he came up to talk to her. "Well, Envy, I'm off. I'm officially retired, and I'm going to live out the rest of my days back home on the banks of the Nile." She smiled whimsically. "I've loved watching you grow up, Envy. You'll have to call me, okay? I want to keep hearing about the things you learn. So, if you have any final questions, better ask them now." Envy searched his memory, but he only had one question. "Dr. Luxora, what does the word beautiful mean? Like, what physically makes something beautiful? I am beautiful with my wig and without it, and how does that work? I've been told a lot of things are beautiful. even though they have nothing in common. Do you know? Dr. Luxora set her head back and stared at the earth far below them. I'd say it's not the appearance so much as what's inside. Something is beautiful when it has meaning and life and depth to it. I didn't think you were beautiful when I first heard about your father's crazy endeavor, but you certainly changed my mind. Paradox envy. You've learned more about common sense than some people I know, and your speeches are proof of that. Speaking of, you're giving another speech soon, aren't you, Envy? Envy nodded. It's been 4 years since the last one. Krista and I are 18 now, so Father said we should give another. Me, OZZY, and Krista will all be speaking, and once we finish, Father says we graduate. The spaceship behind them roared to life, and Dr. Luxora hurried toward it. I'll have to catch the live stream then. Farewell, Paradox Envy. Thank you so much for proving me wrong. The day of their graduation speeches arrived, and OZZY, Envy, and Krista got up early. Krista wore a brand new teal dress, which was tighter and more form-fitting than Father liked. She tidied up her curls and even put makeup on. Envy brushed out his wig and wore his suit, which was starting to become faded from the years of wear. OZZY wore nothing, as was usual for him. The speeches would take place on the glass platform in the loading dock again. Father was completely against this and reminded everyone what happened last time, but he was outvoted, and once again the Paradark kids found themselves whispering in the dark hallways behind the platform, listening to the speakers before them. Envy ran through his speech in his head, but was interrupted by his cue. Krista grabbed both his and OZZY's hand. Hey, you guys are both beautiful, and I couldn't be more proud. Now smile. Good luck. Envy smiled and stepped out into the familiar bright lights and applause. He had learned from the last speech what to expect and knew this one would go smoothly. But one look at the platform's railingless edge made Envy hesitate. He knew he had to walk forward to speak into the mic at the podium, but he desperately didn't want to. The feeling came on so suddenly, he hadn't prepared for this. The podium was so close to the edge. All he could think about was falling off. Envy, you okay? Krista appeared beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Envy blinked to clear his thoughts. I need to think. OZZY, you can go first. Confused, OZZY took the podium and began speaking his portion. Envy and Krista retreated to the dark hallways again. Envy leaned against the wall, trying to get the idea falling out of his head. Krista, something's wrong with me. I can't go near the edge. I must be glitching. Krista hugged him. That's not a glitch. That's called fear. You know how you've always been so obsessed with lessons and learning? Well, sometimes your body learns for you and doesn't tell you. You fell last time, so avoiding the edge is how your subconscious makes sure you don't fall this time. But we can... Wait, what? She cut off, turning her head to listen to what OZZY was saying. Envy sighed. He could hear it from here. Just like last time, OZZY was going off script. My prior hypothesis was correct, OZZY announced. You don't need to learn to live. I've lived just fine not letting outside forces influence me. There's nothing I need to learn. And if there's nothing more to learn, that means I'm perfect. I have learned everything I need to. That awful feeling boiled up inside Envy again, the rotten feeling that was his namesake. Envy had had enough. He stormed out onto the glass platform again. He needed to stop OZZY from spouting nonsense and drive some sense into him. But what was the right plan of action? Push OZZY off the edge? No, Envy had promised not to do anything that extreme. He would just pull OZZY away from the podium. But he had tried that last time, and he had fallen. Envy froze in his tracks, his eyes lingering on the glass platform's edge. And Envy realized he had learned a lesson from that first speech. OZZY was not allowed to be interrupted. Envy couldn't do it. So Krista did. She ran up to the podium and pushed OZZY's mic away from him. And OZZY pushed her. She shoved back, and OZZY shoved her harder. And this time, Envy realized it was intentional. The room erupted with screams as Krista fell out of sight. A million sensors went off in Envy's brain all at once, and he lost his balance and sprawled on the glass floor. His joints were locking up in the fabric of his suit. Krista had fallen off the balcony, and OZZY had pushed her, just like Envy had always known he would. Envy's mind was spinning. What should he do next? Push OZZY off the balcony like he had pushed them? Forgive OZZY, hug him, and never speak of it again? Sit OZZY down and make him learn a lesson? Force OZZY to give speeches every day of his life? None of them seemed worth Krista's life. Which answer was best? Which would Father want? Which would Krista want? What did Envy want to do? What was the right answer regardless? Envy looked up. The room was silent. Envy couldn't tell if his hearing function had broken or if the room really was abandoned. How long had he been sitting here? Where had everyone gone? Why hadn't anyone found him by now? No one was on the platform except himself and OZZY. OZZY stood on the edge, looking down. He was unafraid of falling, unafraid of that which hadn't hurt him. You short-circuited and collapsed, OZZY said casually. But they ignored you and surrounded Krista. They're not fixing her like they started fixing you. They're just crying and standing around. Envy inched closer to his brother on the edge. What are you talking about? She's dead. Krista, our sister, is dead, and you killed her, OZZY. No. OZZY turned to face him. Envy's feet echoed as he stepped firmly on the glass. You could have learned from last time, but no, you had to think you knew everything. We are robots. Mother, Father, and Krista are humans. Robots can shatter and be fixed. Humans can't. They shatter and they're gone forever. Did you never figure that out? No, OZZY repeated. They can fix her. They have to. It's just like last time. You fell and they fixed you and you forgave me. She fell, so they have to fix her so she can forgive me. And you guys will have learned your lesson, right? Envy wanted to reply, but a cracking sound interrupted him. Envy knew that sound, and he carefully began to step backwards. But OZZY kept looking down over the edge, over the empty room. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair. Envy stepped off the glass platform and back into the solid-floored hallway. They just need to fix Krista, and then everything will go back to how it was, and it'll all be okay, right? Right, Envy? The creaking beneath their feet got louder, and OZZY's orange eyes widened as he realized what it was. He tried to run to the safety of the hallway, but his foot broke through the floor. The glass platform shattered, and Envy watched the balcony splinter apart from the safety of the hallway. OZZY slipped through the cracks and fell out of sight. Envy clamped his eyes shut as the rest of the platform came crashing down and echoed around the empty room. Slowly, Envy made his way to the abandoned ground floor. Glass crunched underneath his feet as he navigated the debris. OZZY was barely more than an orange and silver skeleton. His legs had snapped off at the knees. As he stepped closer, Envy noticed something buried in the glass shards, which he picked up. It was OZZY's face, completely separated from his head. His faceplate was frozen in an expression that looked almost stern. Father had certainly done an incredible job of forging it. Aside from that, OZZY was only a motionless spread of scrap metal. But Envy still wanted to take him home, show Mother and Father that OZZY wouldn't be pushing anyone off a balcony anytime soon. Envy moved OZZY's limp body and picked him up, his hands behind OZZY's knees and back. Never before had the Noctis felt so lonely and cold in the void of space. Envy didn't encounter anyone as he carried his brother through the metallic halls. But Envy paused at a window, where the earth hung in the stars, as it had for 18 years and would continue to for years to come. Envy had an idea. OZZY, do you see that? Envy angled OZZY's limp head toward it. That's the earth, and we're on the Noctis. This is our home, where we live with Mother, Father, and no one. But OZZY, I think I finally figured it out. I looked at things and wondered what made them beautiful, but now I think beauty is not seen. It's in the essence of the thing itself. It's full of love and meaning. You are not beautiful, OZZY, at least not after today. Staring at the Earthrise, Envy felt heavy inside. He sighed. Our life is gone, but we'll keep living. We'll keep learning. And eventually, OZZY, we will make our life beautiful again. OZZY didn't move and didn't reply, but his eye twitched. Well, that's the entire story. It's strangely a short one today. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I know I got kind of heavy at the end there, but it's time to talk about the behind the scenes. And this story has a lot of behind the scenes. I got the idea for this story spring semester of my senior year of high school when I realized that almost every single advanced robot story is either a super fighting robot or the robot goes evil. There was rarely an in-between. And I was like, okay, I want to write a story about robots that don't fight each other. They're just going to be chill. They're going to sit on the spaceship and stare at the stars. OZZY and ENVY has 5 main inspirations that came together. Rarely do my stories have that many inspirations. But the first and foremost is the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley, which is my favorite poem. It's a really short poem about a guy describing a place in the desert where there's a statue of the Egyptian pharaoh Ozymandias, but the statue is in pieces and his empire is in ruins, so it's kind of a poem about how no empire is eternal. But when I read the poem my senior year of high school, I had an idea. What if the statue in the poem was a robot body, and Ozymandias was a robot that had attempted an AI takeover? So OZZY was the first character that I thought up in this story. But OZZY's end was set in stone, literally, because his empire falls and he is shattered. That's not a hero's end. That's a villain's defeat. So I knew going into this that OZZY would have to be the villain. And after some trial and error, I got the name OZZY and ENVY, which rolled off the tongue rather nicely. And I realized that ENVY would be an interesting name for a robot. What would that entail? What has a robot to be envious about? The original draft's concept was that ENVY was envious of humans and wanted to learn to be like them, but that concept got lost when I shortened the story down to a podcast size. The other 4 inspirations from the story all come from stories with robots, with human parents, learning how to function in human society, and there's a surprising amount of these. Zane's origin story from Lego Ninjago, X's origin story from the Mega Man X series. I also took inspiration from Portal and Portal 2 video games for its sarcastic, lifelike robots that they have there. And the last inspiration was Shadow's origin story from the Sonic the Hedgehog series. The recent movie showed the backstory pretty accurately to the game I took it from. Both ENVY and Shadow live in space with human sisters, Krista and Maria, and similar to how Maria's story plays out, Krista never makes it off the spaceship. Before I start talking about the individual plot points, I want to mention that OZZY and ENVY doesn't follow the same format that I normally use when writing stories. Most media, including the ones I write, has 5 acts, with an inciting incident at the beginning, a midpoint in the 3rd act that changes the stakes, a crisis moment before the climax in the 4th or 5th act. But I couldn't make the story you just heard fit into that outline very well. So OZZY and ENVY, the story, actually follows the pattern of a Shakespeare tragedy, mostly because we were learning about Shakespeare tragedies in high school English class when I thought the story up. We're getting a lot of high school English class representation here. It's great. The biggest aspects of a Shakespearean tragedy is a character with a problem they seek to fix, which is ENVY, learning as much as he can. The climax is in the 3rd act. That's the biggest difference. The climax is in the middle rather than at the very end. So the first speech, where ENVY gets pushed off the balcony, that's the climax. And the last thing has to do with a Shakespeare tragedy. Everybody dies. That's not really like a requirement, but it's a pattern you see a lot in Shakespeare. Everybody's dying in the last act. ENVY falls and dies, and then he gets fixed. Krista falls and dies. OZZY trips and he dies. You never see the parents at the end of the story. They could be dead, I don't know. Dr. Luxora left for Earth. You never hear from her again. And in the future sequels to this story that I plan to make, take this in the best way, in a non-gruesome Shakespearean way, more people are going to die, okay? So the theme of this story is learning from your mistakes and the consequences if you don't learn. This is taken to the extreme, saying that if people don't learn their mistakes, other people could possibly die. The story begins, as so many Shakespearean tragedies do, with the main character not even there yet. Dr. Luxora actually narrates the first scene, showing an outside perspective, introducing the main character family. Dr. Luxora has the least amount of screen time in this story, but I still wanted her there. She's named after the Egyptian town of Luxor, which is the closest city to where the real-life statue of Ozymandias from the poem was discovered. And as she mentions later, she's originally from Egypt. Dr. Luxora introduces us to the newlywed paradox. First off, can I just brag about that last name that I thought up right there? You combine paradox and patriarch, and you get Paradarch. I love that last name so much. It's one of the best names that I have thought up. The paradox are Adam and Ada. Adam, of course, connecting to the creation of man, and Ada is named after Ada Lovelace, who is widely considered the first computer programmer. This sets them up already to have a human child and a robotic child. It's pretty much in their DNA. So I tried to think up what would the future look like in space, typically like metal halls and windows and neon lighting and stuff. But rather than go with that, I decided to make their living quarters as familiar as possible. So the living quarters have sheetrock walls and a kitchen and a hallway with bedrooms and a TV. And the way Adam offers leftovers and there's cardboard boxes everywhere, it feels kind of anachronistic in the whole sci-fi scheme. But it also tells us what kind of people the paradox are. They're just different. This is not a normal sci-fi story, hopefully. When Adam is talking with Luxora in the first scene, he mentions the main point that inspired the story in the first place. Humans require 18 years of raising before they can function on their own, so why do people code AIs after only a few years and expect them to work? Now, I am not a coder. I do not know how making AIs works. That's probably completely wrong, what he just said there. So I'm just going to chalk that up to sci-fi so I don't offend the computer science majors watching. Next we meet Envy, and we learn that his name actually came from Luxora making fun of him, and Adam just ignored the teasing and took the name for himself. Envy is purple and silver because I love the colors purple and silver, and I think they look really good together. Luxora only starts to see potential in Envy when he writes his name. A character's name is the most important thing about them. It gives them their identity, and Envy having an identity makes Luxora and the reader wonder maybe he's perhaps lifelike. So after the first scene, Envy takes over as the main character, and there's a time jump from when Envy is a month old to when he's 5 years old. He hasn't changed at all physically, he's just mentally grown. He plays dress up with Krista, and Krista dresses up like a fairy and says that she wishes she could fly. And by the end of the story, she does fly, albeit she flies down. Is that dark humor? I have a theory that all foreshadowing is dark humor to an extent. That might be going too far, though. I might need to make them play a different game there. But OZZY and Envy suffers from one of the worst heresies in all of science fiction, the passive protagonist. Envy's goal in the story is to learn as many lessons as he can, but that's not specific enough to be a driving factor, so I gave Envy a side quest. As a robot, he can't understand what the term beautiful means because it's too vague, so he spends 18 years of his life asking various people, trying to understand what the word means, and different people give him different responses. At this point, Envy gets his defining factor, his clothes. To fit in with his family, Envy wears clothes and a wig. I've seen in robot stories before how the real-life writers deal with clothes. Whenever you deal with robots, you have to figure out what do they look like, do they wear clothes, are they allowed to wear clothes, how would they wear clothes, stuff like that. So Envy wearing a full suit sometimes, I hope is unique to this story. Next there's a time jump to when Envy is 6 years old, and then another time jump to when he's 8. He and Krista play pretend as he walks across a piece of glass, only for it to shatter, which foreshadows the ending. And then there's a time jump to when Envy is 12, and this is when OZZY's concept is introduced. They're going to clone Envy to see if the clone will still follow the lessons Envy has learned. And when Dr. Luxora proposes this to them, she says she'll make them a brother. And Krista asks if she'll make a robot brother or a real brother. And this can just be a throwaway line for a laugh, but it brings with it some serious connotations. Krista believes that she and Envy are the same thing. Like they could build a live human like her the same way they build a robot like Envy. And she's not the only one. OZZY also thinks this. That's why he shoves her off the balcony, because he assumes he pushed Envy and they rebuilt him. Chris is the same as them, so they can rebuild her too. Now, at this point in the story, OZZY gets introduced. He's identical to Envy, only he's orange, because I thought orange complements purple pretty well. And the first time you see Envy, he's sitting in their father's favorite chair, almost like he's trying to replace his father or make the rules himself. Another time jump happens. Envy is 14 while OZZY is 2, and they give speeches on the glass platform, which is, as I said earlier, the climax of the story. Envy's speech in the story states the theme: you have to learn from your mistakes, and you can't learn without making a mistake first. At this point, OZZY identifies himself as the story's villain. OZZY, being a clone of Envy, knows all the lessons Envy has learned, but he hasn't actually experienced the mistakes that earn those lessons, and therefore he doesn't properly appreciate them. He thinks he doesn't need to learn anymore, and he shows this by purposefully disregarding the lessons Envy has taught him. He neglects to wear clothes, even though Envy sewed them, and he snaps a pencil in half, even though Envy taught him how to properly hold it. But during the speech, Envy realizes something. Envy is 14 at this point in his life, but OZZY is 2, and Envy realizes whose idea was it to give this guy a microphone, because OZZY hasn't lived enough or experienced enough, which is the exact sort of thing that Adam Paradark wanted to avoid when he built Envy in the first place. His whole thing was to build Envy and raise him first before doing anything. OZZY hasn't lived enough. So in a way, OZZY is hypocritical to the whole reason Adam built Envy. They are foils, bringing out the best and worst in each other. It's one of the most iconic, well-used trope in fiction, two characters that foil each other. When OZZY apologizes and promises that he won't push people off the balcony again, Envy realizes he is lying. Because if OZZY doesn't learn from his mistakes, there's nothing to stop him from doing it again. This might be the most obvious piece of foreshadowing I have ever written, because foreshadowing is not meant to flat out spoil the story's ending so blatantly. But even though you know what's going to happen, the ending still has enough shock factor in reserve. Envy realizes that the only way to ensure OZZY doesn't do it again is to shove him off a balcony so he can experience the pain and learn the lesson, but of course that's not always practical. And then there's another time jump, from Envy being 14 to Envy being 18. Dr. Luxora retires and goes back to Earth, showing how she's getting older. And this scene was added last minute because I realized Luxora didn't show up after the opening scenes. I wanted a way for her story to end here. And with so many time jumps, Envy doesn't age because he's a robot, so I used Krista as a way to measure the time. She runs around playing fairies when she's 5, she plays castle when she's 8, she makes bracelets when she's 14, and now at 18, she's having breakdowns, wearing makeup, and wearing clothes that make her parents feel uncomfortable. The speech takes place in the same way as the last one. Adam reminds everyone what happened last time, saying they should learn from their mistakes, but nobody listens. OZZY shoves Krista off. And at this point in the story, it's very choppy. Earlier drafts had a time jump for after OZZY pushed Krista off. He would get arrested, and Envy would have to try to cope with that, and Krista would have a funeral. But I knew the final scene would have to take place on the glass platform again, and since OZZY and Envy were both just already there, I decided to just jump to it. That gives a plot hole, because the room is abandoned and everyone just forgot about OZZY and Envy. That doesn't make any sense. So I knew in writing the story, the perfect parallel was for OZZY to shove Envy and Krista off the balcony, and Envy gets his revenge by pushing OZZY off. The problem is that that's not in Envy's nature, because he is the story's ethical hero. So with Envy unable to do it, I decided to do the glass platform thing. Envy hears the glass breaking and gets off of it, but OZZY didn't learn the lesson from last time, and he doesn't get off the glass in time. It breaks like the bridge Envy walked on earlier, and OZZY gets justice served to him by falling just like his victims. OZZY shatters on the ground in the same way the Ozymandias statue is shattered in the poem that started all of this. So Envy ends the story by carrying OZZY in the same way that his father carried Envy at the start, and shows the lifeless body in his arms. There's the earth below them. This symbolizes how Adam raised Envy right, and from now on, Envy will raise OZZY right. Envy is now filling in the role of the father. The final lines are that OZZY's eye twitches, meaning OZZY is still alive. If there are any sequels, which there eventually will be to this story, OZZY will definitely return. He is not dead, he's coming back. The real question is, did he learn his lesson? Well, on that note, that's everything with OZZY and Envy. This one was kind of a whirlwind, so I hope you enjoyed it. This story is one of my favorites, honestly. I love just thinking about it, writing down random things that Envy and OZZY and Krista would be doing. So I want to know what you think of it, because this story is very important to me. Well, I've been on Imposter Earth long enough. I got recommended a good vacation spot, though. It's a couple planets over, so I'm going to go there for a little bit and try to recover from this imposter syndrome I'm feeling on Imposter Earth right now. Just a reminder, you can listen to all the Oblivion's Library podcast recordings on my YouTube channel. Also check out Instagram and Wattpad for sneak peeks and other drawings. And of course, listen right here live on WTUR Radio. Thank you so much for listening. This is Oblivion's Library, signing off. Take care.